All right, everybody, we are now live with Symphony RM. As a reminder, we've been having these conversations on a weekly basis, and we've really been enjoying watching them grow. So what started as a conversation around patient acquisition versus patient activation. Should we look at patient acquisition as the go-to, acquiring new patients and moving on, or do we look at activating an entire relationship? That conversation has snowballed and grown into things like lifetime value, and even deeper than that, going into last week, we focused heavily on data ethics and privacy concerns. So we're really excited to be continuing these conversations. We've actually got a great roster of people who have been watching as well, been watching and growing along with us, and will be participating. So if you followed along the first conversation around patient acquisition, we're going to introduce Craig Kartchner in a second here. As a reminder, kind of our recurring hosts, myself, I work in the data science and analytics angle at Symphony RM, along with Sheetal Shah, who's our chief operations officer and has led a major digital transformation efforts at many top 10 organizations. Any hello from you, Sheetal?
I'm just unfortunately the only one that doesn't have a nice COVID beard like you two. I'm just
I know. How do you even think without being able to do this?
I think I'm gonna have some goals set up for myself now, because I got you're right. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna monitor your beard growth and then productive output, Sheetal. So that's a great experiment for us to run.
Hey, it's highly correlated, believe me.
Yes.
High R value.
We're looking for causation here. Along with a major data enthusiast, a major player in using artificial intelligence to help reach out within the market, Craig Kartchner. So we're really excited that he was a participant in the first conversation. If you read the comments, there's a lot of stuff that we want to delve into from Craig's perspective on how he's led marketing efforts at Intermountain Healthcare, and now at HonorHealth as the AVP of growth and marketing for HonorHealth. Any hello from you, Craig?
No, other than that, thanks. Happy to be here.
Great. So the way that we conduct these sessions, if you came in here through our email or messaging or anything like that, this is definitely a fireside chat style. So the idea by going on LinkedIn Live versus Zoom or any of the other platforms is, when you're on Zoom, it's kind of siloed to where when you ask questions, it kind of goes into a queue and there's all kinds of different waiting, and you're not sure if it's going to get answered. Here, you can see what's going on. You have a chat, and we just want to invite you to, like, if you hear something interesting, give us likes or make comments, ask questions, and we're right here. We just want to answer that stuff in real time for you. So without any further ado, we just wanted to dig in a little bit on some of the things that Craig has shared, and some of the leadership lessons that have brought him success at HonorHealth. So, Craig, starting out, so in the after the last session, you commented that it would be helpful for healthcare leaders to start acknowledging that healthcare is a business. There's nothing ignoble about that. Would you mind expanding on the thoughts of what you actually mean by healthcare is a business?
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily a new notion, but I've found in my career that providers, doctors, nurses, those who have followed the noble art of healing people, caring for people, they are reluctant to call healthcare a business because it seems like it focuses on profits when you do that. You're focusing on the almighty dollar instead of on the noble business of healing people. What they fail to remember or to acknowledge is that successful businesses across all industries focus on the customer.
Yep.
If you focus on nothing but profits, then you're not going to do very well. You have to focus on what your customers want and need. And that's precisely what these caregivers, these doctors, nurses want to do, is focus on their patients, their customers. So if you can just align those thoughts, that acknowledging it's a business means you need to do what you want to do even better. That is, focus on the needs of your patients and customers. That's what I mean when I say it's like a business.
Shital, any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I think that when Craig made that comment, I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was just thinking about it more. It also lets you start the conversation about, hey, look, it's a business, and that means we have to invest in things like our relationship with the individual, because the days of medicine of previous worlds, like, you know, Little House on the Prairie, where you have the doctor that always shows up to your house, always for those moments in time. We know that that's changed, right? Technology's changed, the way we live, and all that has changed. So if we agree that healthcare is a business and for noble means of healing and the like, we also now have to say, well, where do we invest in building, putting in the right tooling to help expand and scale, forming relationships and the like. I think the one thing that surprised me, Craig, was when you and I were talking, and I heard this from a number of health systems, during the pandemic, the amount of engagement, even though elective procedures were deferred, volume utilization dropped really fast, was still, consumers were still coming to the health system websites, like looking for help, looking for a trusted advisor. So I really like the concept of, if we agree that it's a business, now the question is sort of what tooling do you have to put in place to really form a relationship? Because you got to form a relationship. It's not just coming into the door of the health system that counts down.
Yeah, you're right. I think another thing that can happen is, I think sometimes ego or past processes can get in the way of focusing on the customer. I'll give you a couple examples. Physicians historically have been the gods of healthcare. They're the ones who call the shots. They do all the training, so they have the knowledge to treat people, to heal people. And so, nurses, at least historically, it's changed, of course, now to be a team-based approach, team-based care. But historically, the nurses didn't ever make decision or call shots. They waited to be told what to do by the physician. And that, to some extent, applied to the patient, too.
Yeah.
They didn't decide for themselves. They weren't part of the decision-making process. It's what the doctor told them to do. That's what they would do. And that has changed over the past couple decades, really, but needs to change more. I think I've seen some providers who assume, with like open notes, sharing their notes on patients publicly and transparently, so their patients can read what they said about them in their notes during their visit, or releasing lab results really quickly. As soon as you get a lab result from the lab, release it to the patient. Well, a lot of providers are opposed to that, because they say, well, the patients don't understand the lab results and they're just going to get upset and frustrated and call in to get an explanation. And they might be right, but customer centricity would mandate that you figure out a way to educate them and explain it in a way that's convenient for them. Don't make them wait 2 or 3 days until the doctor can get around to calling them with the lab results. Release them immediately with an explanation video or with other things that can educate them on which item means what in that lab result. Those are a couple examples,
So it's like it's more often, it's being proactive. It's almost reducing the sort of these artificial thresholds that were set before we communicate. It's in many ways, I think consumers are expecting that, right? Like people expect it everywhere, right? To be able to quickly
exactly.
Yeah. So
that's
what business does nowadays, is exactly that, like you said.
And so when you tapped on what people are actually expecting, and Craig, you were talking about the transparency. One other comment that we really wanted to dig into and get your thoughts on is that businesses are willing to go to great lengths to be able to connect with their audience or their base. So wanted to get into your thoughts on just mirroring what's going on in the broader business context. What are some of your thoughts on what kind of connections or the links that healthcare systems should be going to connect with their patients?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I've talked to Shital about a ton in the past, is exactly this. It's in healthcare, we have more data about our customers than just about any other industry. It's just we don't use it like other industry might use it. But that's the point, Chris, is exactly what you said. Use that data to make meaningful connections and to serve customers. And it really comes down to this: next best actions that you guys will profess about, right? It's about taking advantage of every single opportunity you have with your customer, with your patient. Anytime you encounter them, whether they come to you or you go to them, you have to make the most of that precious couple of minutes or email or whatever it is. You got to take full advantage of it. That's how you make connections, and that's how you advance your business while at the same time focusing on the customer and connecting with them around what they need and want.
Are there any stories for you, or Chital? Are there any stories that come to mind as far as a transformation at one of those touch points, be it email, be it through call center, be it through any kind of interaction, or even provider outreach, or just any aspect? Are there any examples of a transformation at any of those touch points that you can point to that really enhance that relationship?
Yeah, I can think of a lot of examples. I think a business would say that it's cross-selling and upselling, right? When someone calls into the call center, they're on this phone plan. If you're in the phone industry, telephony industry, you want to cross-sell and upsell, get them to buy that new phone, get them to upgrade to a different plan with more data or whatever, right? Well, that sounds dirty in healthcare to cross-sell and upsell, but that's where the stories are, Chris. So someone calls in, you see that call center agent sees in the notes that they have whatever the condition is. And one example that I can give is we've tried to connect our research institute, the HonorHealth Research Institute, to those call center agents, so they're more aware of clinical trials that are going on. And so if they see that in the notes that they might be eligible for a trial, they can recommend that. And we've seen, we have some COVID-19 related clinical trials, and we've done exactly that process, inform people, because we can see their notes and their clinical notes. We can cross-sell, upsell, and inform them about this COVID-19 trial and get them enrolled, send them immediately warm transfer over to the Research Institute folks to enroll them in a trial. So that's one simple example.
In many ways, it's cross-serve and upserve in many ways, right?
There you go.
We're not. If it's your health that we're trying to take care of, we're not selling you anything but better outcomes.
There you go. Yeah, I like that.
Chris, I'm curious though, Craig, we talk about having that unified view of our customer, but customers are coming from us at different channels. We just gave an example of it in a access center or call center setting. Craig, what are you seeing on the digital front? Do you think that either through the immediate events that just took place, or just generational shifts in technology, are your thoughts in terms of how customers want to engage? I mean, are we going to start seeing augmented reality-based office visits or chatbots? Is our Xbox going to connect into the patient's room? What are some of the insights that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that eventually. I think because healthcare has been so far behind when it comes to this customer activation and connecting with patients in a different way, the way they want, we're so far behind that it's going to take us a while to get there. But yeah, eventually, I think virtual reality, augmented reality will absolutely be part of treating people virtually. But we got to it wasn't until the pandemic that we got parity in payment for treating either in person or video. Finally got that payment parity, and I'm hoping it stays even after the pandemic.
Well, remember a few years ago when we were talking, we talked about video visits or virtual health, telehealth. We talked about chatbots, and they were always those sort of, out here type things. It wasn't the now, and it's amazing in 3 months what happens when those are now parity. Like if you don't have that, I guarantee you're working on it, because that is now what consumers expect, right?
That's exactly right. Anytime I talk to my friends, who are outside of healthcare and other industries about what I'm doing, and I get, me, I get really excited and passionate about what I'm doing. They always invariably look at me like, you weren't already doing that? So you're implementing a chat bot and a live chat? Okay, you weren't already doing that? because healthcare is far behind. So the stuff that's super cool to us, like, yeah, we're finally doing this, they're like, well, geez, other industries have done that for 15, 20 years.
And it's kind of like once telehealth achieved parity, it wasn't years of planning that people had to be able to implement a policy. It was, okay, now telehealth is a 100% necessity, and you have to get something in place as fast as possible.
Yeah.
So I thought that was incredible. From just looking at numbers from a base of hospitals that we work with, we saw telehealth visits increase by from February to April by more than 13x. So it was just, several thousands of percent increase in telehealth.
We went from 1%, less than 1% of our visits were via telehealth to 53% in the same period. We're talking a couple weeks. So astronomical.
Incredible.
It'd actually be really interesting to see if how much of this remains sticky. Did not having to do the drive. Obviously, not all visits can be telehealth, but the ones that can, will that just become the basis of what me as a customer wants, right? Like, did it save me time? Was the conversation as good? And does that mean I could do more of them, right? And have more visits with my provider to, have a conversation about a health issue. So the stickiness, the patient experience side, I'm actually waiting to see what some of the early patient surveys look like. And I know that Chris has actually been doing some really cool research off of public data that we're releasing in a few weeks. So I won't share the early results that Chris has identified, but it seems like virtual visits and some of the proactive sort of feedback that we're getting from customers is that it's here to stay.
Not to spoil the movie, but basically we're doing research on reviews and comments that patients of One Medical are leaving. So using using what patients are actually saying to understand what's leading to positive experiences, and video visits are really high ranked in the things that their patients view more favorably. So we're trying to see what we can extract from that information so that other health systems can learn from what their patients are saying. So more to come on that. As far as this part of the conversation, our angle of the universe, one thing that we've observed is that, with all the different data sources that health systems have, including like on less of the marketing side, the EMR, clinical data, claims data, and things like that, marketing brings in this layer of, well, we understand how people are responding to outreach. We look at the reviews. We look at how people interact with various types of communication. So that's an angle that's a level of understanding that marketing has that often isn't shared with the rest of the organization. But we're seeing with questions on how to promote telehealth, how to get word out about services and things like that, there's more of a need to work together and break down those walls, break down the silos. So Craig, I was just wondering from your perspective, what are some, or do you have any stories on anything that you've done to take marketing's expertise and help share that with other parts of the organization? And ultimately, how do we help marketing get the buy-in and organizational support that it needs to better that patient engagement that we're all responsible for?
Yeah, I think there are two things that have happened at HonorHealth. One is we have focused a lot more on customer research and having actual data to back up what we've been saying. So we do a lot of surveys and studies, both primary and secondary. And that's been one of the most powerful things, to go to other business units, other areas of the company with actual data to tell them what patients want, instead of just saying that, I'm a marketing expert and I know now let's go straight to the customer. So the voice of the customer research has been super powerful. The other thing is necessity is the mother of invention. So the pandemic, and it's strange that I get so excited about this deadly disease, and I don't want to be insensitive because it is a deadly disease, but it's been so good to force people to do things a different way, force them to get out of their rut and the method that they've always followed. So we've had business units come to us and say, you guys have a text platform? You can text customers? But we didn't even know that. And on and on and on. There are 1,000 examples of technologies and things that we can do that people didn't know of or didn't want to try, didn't want to attempt because they were comfortable with the way they were doing things. But the pandemic disrupted that so much that we're now getting people coming out of the woodwork wanting to partner on things. It's been great.
Seems like there's a book in there, Craig. Silo busting driven by a pandemic.
Yeah, man, maybe there is.
So, could you just curious about like the collection of data on voice of the customer? What are some of the aspects and angles that you're collecting? What are you doing to understand what these patients are asking for, and be able to use that to say, hey, here's the data on what we should be focusing on?
I'm super excited about that. So I'm glad you asked, actually. So we started doing a customer experience index study at the beginning of this year. It, to my knowledge, had never been done because I wanted to see if a healthcare organization was doing that, a broad index that takes several things into account to composite an actual index for customer experience. So we have 4 components that go into that. There's NPS, so the likelihood to recommend. There's overall satisfaction. There's brand trust. And then there's customer effort. So how much effort did it take the customer to do what he or she wanted to do when they came to your site, when they went to your clinic, whatever. So those 4 components make up the CX index. So we do that broadly for Honor Health and for our competitors in the market. And then we've done journeys. So we do about 12 different service line or area journeys with that same mentality, that same approach, these components that make up the overall experience, and really dive into the individual steps that people go through when they go through a healthcare journey. So that research has been just incredible. We've gotten so many insights. What we've done in addition to that is, and that's a whole wealth of data that, again, our clinical teams, when we present this, it's so useful to them. They see firsthand what customers are saying, and we have very specific things to work on to improve. It's been great. But then we also dive in deeper and brainstorm solutions, think how we can solve things, and go back to customers and say, hey, here's the things we want to work on. What's most important to you? How would you prioritize these possible solutions to these problems if you were controlling the pocketbook and controlling our priorities? So we go directly to find out what they would do. And that's been another really insightful exercise.
That's fascinating work. And so you're collecting that internally and on competitors. What are the data points that like how do you gather that information?
So it's via email.
Okay.
Well, at least the initial part, the journey mapping and the initial CX index study is via email.
Craig, what's the reaction been when you've taken thousands, if not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of data points to some of the folks that you mentioned on the front line? Like, what do they think of that data? Is it shocking?
Yeah, sometimes it is. And sometimes we have to be careful in the way we present it, because sometimes it's not pretty, and they can be a little defensive and think, well, but that's because of this. And so we always say, we understand there are a lot of factors that go into this, and it could be that there's just a disconnect, just a few tweaks and some shifts can really change this around. So we don't want it to be disheartening. We want it to be empowering.
Great.
Well, yeah, the really empowering part about that is once we start listening, once we start opening the door and letting the comments flow in, we find out that these processes that we've been attached to and ways of doing business might not have worked in the past. So a needed transition. There might be some pain, but clearly a needed transition.
Yeah, absolutely.
So kind of continuing on in that. So it just seems like going like shifting mindsets from the typical ways of doing business to taking data-driven approaches across all these different avenues, especially across listening to patients. I mean, it seems like that would be met with some resistance from some angles. I mean, especially like we just can't go in and take control, and we might even have the greatest ideas, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be adopted. So I was curious, and I think a lot of people might need this, is like how to stay positive. Like when you're going through all these changes and challenges and transitions, how do you maintain positivity, focus, and not give up in getting these kinds of changes pushed through?
I think you hit on something, Chris. I think perhaps without even realizing it, several times during this broadcast, you have asked for stories. I think that's the key. You want to focus on the end state vision really intently on where we want to be. Don't focus on the problems of now. That's when you get disheartened and overwhelmed. Focus on the vision and where you want to go, and do it via stories, because those are the most impactful. Those are the most meaningful. So talk about specific examples of patients, of course, where you can with privacy concerns, right? But talk about specific things that they've experienced that exhibit the benefits of that future plan, that show the fulfillment of that vision, even in small little ways, small little slivers. That's the way to keep energy up, because it's so much easier to see the impact, to get that light bulb ding, like, oh, okay, I see, when you go do it through stories.
Serves as a sort of a guiding star, right? That those stories actually inspire one to move forward, not focus on the today.
Yeah, exactly right.
Any other thoughts on that, Sheetal? Because, not to harp on your background too much, but having led digital transformation and having gone through the growing pains as well, curious if you have any insights that would be helpful for people to take back and keep their motivation. I mean, there's like the viewers that we have and the people that we're talking to every day, they mirror that mindset. Curious about any insights you might be able to share too, Sheetal.
No, I mean, I think there's when you're trying to inspire change, there's different types of people that you're trying to think a little differently, and all move towards the same direction. I think Craig hit both of them, right? Storytelling is a powerful vehicle for that, and sometimes it's the soft stuff that really inspires people, because it gives them, it makes it real. On the other side, what Craig mentioned is also there's certain people that really do well when you have data, right? Because that's irrefutable. Like, this is data, right? And so I think those were two awesome points that Craig brought up that are important for change. And I think that in healthcare, in many ways, those are probably the two strongest things you have.
Yeah.
Craig and Sheetal, I know that you guys are looking at like kind of a blank screen, but I can tell you're getting some great comments in here. Jared Johnson, thank you for the feedback. He says, looking good, Craig. So thank you for that.
Jared, miss you, buddy.
We've got a question from Mike Leonard. So as far as stories and pieces of vision, he said, what are some of the stories or pieces of vision about where Honor Health wants to be? Or Craig, if you don't want to get into Honor Health specifically, where healthcare should be?
Yeah, I think the stories, so specific stories, man, it's logical that you would turn immediately to that. And of course, now I'm drawing a blank and don't have any specific stories to tell you. So I'm violating the exact thing I said to do. But I think it's showing how people are in the control seat. They're in the driver's seat. It's not just the physician, it's a team-based care. I think stories related specifically to that are the most powerful. And so I can't think of one off the top of my head now.
Well, but, I remember, Craig, I remember one great story that inspired us. We were going to meet you in person, meet your team in person, and we were in a ride share, and they shared a story like, they're looking at where we're going. They're like, oh, Honor Health. I think it was this gentleman's brother-in-law had just gone through an experience, but this is the brother-in-law had gone through this experience, but here's the Lyft driver basically telling us the doctors that he had, the nurses he had. I mean, talk about inspiring walking into a meeting at Honor Health. I mean, there's stories everywhere. And it's one thing I've learned is just have to listen. You'll hear them.
Next question we got from the audience, Jared Johnson. How do you know, and this is super relevant to what we're going through right now, but how do you know when to shift your long-term goals?
Jared, interesting one. Interesting question. I think there are a couple aspects to that. And one of them is when you realize that where you want or need to be isn't aligning with where you're heading. And that seems kind of obvious, but that's really what it comes down to, isn't it? If you make this shift to focus on customer needs and wants, and so to focus on customer experience really heavily, you will likely find out that your culture, your technology, your operations are not leading you to that same point. You're diverging. So that's when you'll realize that you need to shift those goals to align with the end state vision, so you're on the same path heading toward the same thing. I mean, that's, in my mind, that's probably the moment you realize that you're on diverging paths. And I think most companies, no one is ever on the perfectly aligned path. I think that's really difficult, if not impossible. But if you can make it as close as and constantly shift to make it that not parallel line, the single line, I think that's the key.
Fantastic. Well, we are right at the top of the hour. So we would be winding down right now. I do like staying on and asking more questions, just because it's just really fun to see what the audience thinks and share those perspectives. But any closing thoughts or closing words, Craig?
Yeah, I think it's the most exciting time in the world for healthcare. It's the best time to be in healthcare, because we're making those shifts that focus on the customer's wants and needs, on serving our customers better. And there is so much joy and satisfaction in that. It's meaningful because you're changing lives and not just healing the body, but making connections that are so much more meaningful than just healing the body. And that's why I'm so excited to be in healthcare right now.
And any closing thoughts from you, Sheetal?
Yeah, Craig nailed it there. I mean, talk about, we're at a generational shift in the way how healthcare is delivered, how it's consumed by the other side, the amount of data being generated. There's no other industry in our time that has so much information, that hasn't really realized the value of it. So now we get to do something about it. So, if there's one thing, it should be inspiring for all of us to be big change agents.
Amen.
Well, guys, everybody who joined, we appreciate you. Craig, appreciate you coming on. I feel like there's a movement going on right now, and Craig, you're a big part of it by using data to push change rather than using old school intuition or thoughts or anything like that, but taking the voice of the patient and then converting that into actionable tactics and strategy. I think that's part of the future, and it's actually part of a future that a lot of organizations want to belong to. So thank you for ushering that in. And if there's any questions or anything like that, feel free to comment on the video. We're about to shut down now, but we're going to do these fireside chats every Friday. We've got some great speakers lined up. Jared Johnson, thank you for joining. He'll be on with us next week. And we'll cover a broad range of topics across healthcare over the coming weeks. We've got digital transformation in healthcare IT. We've got physician liaison relationships. We're going to dig in deep on each of these subjects.
I'll think of some really tough questions, impossible to answer questions for Jared next week. So thanks for the heads up.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.